You know that feeling, right? You're just staring at something you know you have to do, but your brain just will not start. It's like you're stuck in mud. You feel drained, frustrated, and it feels like you're fighting a battle with yourself literally every single day. Well, what if I told you it's not a battle of willpower at all? I mean, for years, that's what we've been told, isn't it? That it's a character flaw. We blame ourselves. We think, I'm just lazy, or I'm not disciplined enough. You ask yourself, why can't I just get going? It's a brutal cycle. But that's the big question we're going to tackle today, because the answer, well, it could completely change how you see yourself and what you're capable of. Okay, get ready for this. Lab data, we're talking from thousands of patients who struggle with focus, shows that a staggering 91% of low motivation, it has nothing to do with willpower. It's tied to a specific, measurable deficiency in the brain. This isn't a personality trait, folks. It's a biological signal. Your body's trying to tell you something's missing. So that brings us to what I like to call the willpower delusion. See, for decades, the whole conversation about focus and drive has been laser-focused on one famous brain chemical, dopamine. And look, dopamine is a huge deal, but focusing only on that, it's like trying to solve a puzzle when you don't even have all the pieces. And yeah, dopamine is absolutely crucial, no doubt about it. It's our reward chemical, our pleasure and drive molecule. It's what makes you want to do things. So it makes total sense, right? When your motivation is in the tank, you assume, my dopamine must be low. But here's the twist. Low dopamine is often just the symptom. It's the last domino to fall, not the one that started the chain reaction.
So to find the real culprit, we have to go back. We need to look one step earlier in the brain's chemical assembly line. You gotta ask, what's happening before that dopamine factory is even supposed to turn on? Because it turns out, if the ignition switch is busted, it doesn't matter how amazing the engine is. You're not going anywhere.
Which brings us right to our next section, the real motivation molecule. It's time to meet the unsung hero, the overlooked player in this whole game, the neurotransmitter that is the real ignition switch for our motivation system.
So let's meet phenylethylamine, or PEA for short. Seriously, think of this stuff as the spark plug for your brain. It's an excitatory neurotransmitter, which means its job is to get things going, to stimulate the central nervous system. It doesn't just, help with motivation, it directly ignites it. It's the literal first signal that screams to your brain, okay, let's do this.
And this isn't just some wild theory. The clinical data is fascinating. Dr. Legrand, who's run thousands of these lab tests, says he sees low PA levels way more often than he sees low dopamine. And get this, he finds that about 90% of his patients with ADHD are actually low in phenylethylamine. This is a real pattern seen in labs over and over again.
I mean, just look at that. Let that sink in. A staggering 9 out of 10 people struggling with focus are walking around with a major deficiency in the one molecule that's supposed to get them started. This isn't some minor tweak. For so many people, this is the primary biological roadblock. It's the reason they feel like they can't get out of first gear.
Okay, so how does this all actually work? How does it all connect? Let's dive into that in our next section, the dopamine assembly line. I want you to picture your brain's chemical pathway like a factory, because you're about to see exactly where the whole system is breaking down.
All right, here's the most important thing to get. PEA isn't just some separate chemical floating around. It's the very first step in the entire dopamine process, step 1. So if you're low on that, if that first step fails, the whole assembly line downstream just grinds to a complete halt. No PEA, no go.
Okay, let's walk through this assembly line together. Everything starts with an essential amino acid called phenylalanine. Think of this as the raw material that gets delivered to the factory. Now, your body uses this stuff for 2 super important jobs. First, it creates that PEA, that's the spark, the ignition. At the same time, it also uses phenylalanine to create another amino acid called tyrosine. And from tyrosine, we get L-Dopa, which finally becomes dopamine, our reward. See how it works? The exact same raw material is responsible for building both the spark and the reward.
But here's a question for you. What happens if the machinery in the factory is broken? I mean, it's not enough to just have a pile of raw materials, right? The factory needs tools to turn one thing into another. In biochemistry, we call these tools cofactors. And if you're missing the right tools, the whole assembly line just breaks down.
And this right here is where another huge piece of the puzzle just clicks into place. That critical conversion, turning phenylalanine into PEA, our ignition step, it requires a very specific tool. That tool is vitamin B6, especially in its active form P5P. And guess what the data shows? up to 60% of patients are also deficient in B6. So think about it. You could be missing the raw material or the tool to work with it, or maybe even both.
Okay, I know this sounds like a lot of biochemistry, but the solution is actually pretty straightforward. And that brings us to Section 4, reigniting the pathway. Now that we know exactly where the factory is failing, we can talk about how to get it the supplies it needs to get back up and running. So let's start at the beginning with the raw material, phenylalanine. It's called an essential amino acid for a reason. Essential means your body literally cannot make it. You have to get it from the outside world, either from your diet, we're talking high-quality proteins like meat, cheese, eggs, or through a supplement. It's simple. Without enough phenylalanine, your brain just doesn't have the basic building blocks to make that PEA spark.
Now, if you go looking for supplements, you're going to see something called DL-phenylalanine a lot. So what's that all about? Well, the L form is the natural one our bodies use. The DL form is basically a synthesized mix of two forms, and the reason it's so common is that research suggests our bodies can absorb and use it more easily. That's why you'll see the DL form recommended so often. It's just a more efficient way to restock the factory, so to speak.
All right, so we've covered the problem, that feeling of being stuck. We've talked about the real cause, a lack of PEA, and we've looked at the solution. So now let's put it all together. In our final section, your PEA reset protocol. This is the simple, actionable plan based on all this clinical data.
It really boils down to 3 simple steps. Step 1, test your levels. Seriously, don't guess. A lab test is the only way to know for sure if a PEA deficiency is what's holding you back. Step 2, if you are deficient, the sources point to supplementing with 2,000 to 4,000 milligrams of DL-phenylalanine a day to build those levels back up. And finally, step 3, don't forget the tools. Make sure you're getting enough vitamin B6, that P5P, to actually make the conversion happen.
And that brings us to the big takeaway here. For so long, we've been taught to treat low motivation like it's some kind of personal, moral failing. But what if it's not? Just think about it. If that struggle you have to just get started, if it isn't a character flaw, but a fixable biochemical problem, what does that change for you? What else could you achieve if your brain finally had the spark it's been missing all this time?